This is the Power Couple Podcast. This is where you go. This is where you go when you're ready to expand in your marriage inside of communication, sex and intimacy, parenting, spirituality, and co-creation. If you're ready to take your marriage to the next level, then welcome home. This is the Power Couple. This is where you come together to get better as one. This is the Power Couple. This is where you go if you're ready to take your marriage to the next level. This is the Power Couple Podcast with your host, Katie and Jesse Yule. This is the Power Couple Podcast. Let's go.
All right. Welcome back to the Power Couples Podcast. And I'm here with my beautiful, lovely
host, Katie Yule. And I'm here to introduce my co-host, Jesse Yule.
Yeah.
Did you like that song?
I did. That's our new intro. And that's
who did that for us?
Mr. Joey Yak.
Is amazing.
Yeah. So it's like our own little like rap song.
I know.
I just want to sit here and keep playing it over and over.
This is the Power Couple Podcast. I know, me too.
Yeah. So how's it going?
It's going good. We're on date night, locked up in the office doing a podcast, but we did get to pick up some of our favorite food at Coastal Kitchen, and they even brought us
drinks to go,
which I think is absolutely amazing.
Cheers. All right. So today's topic is sex and intimacy. And so as we get into this topic, this is one of the things that comes up most inside of the conversations we have outside of communication as probably one of the biggest topics that couples struggle with.
Right.
And I think a lot of times we want intimacy, but we miss out on.
Well, I don't, you know what?
We miss out on it and have sex or settle for sex.
Well, okay. I mean, I truly believe that a lot of couples, maybe they don't know what intimacy looks like.
Sure.
Or, there's no map on sex and intimacy. And I think, we kind of, depending on where you are in life, that could be easily skipped over and go right to what we know, as opposed to, being educated on a little bit more of how to deepen the connection, to further the attraction.
Oh, yeah, I like that. So there's what we know, and then there's how we grow. And so maybe today we can walk people down a path of how they can grow inside of intimacy so that, the sex they have, the connection they have is at a deeper level.
Right. And it doesn't have to actually always be sexual. They can connect in more ways, Yeah,
it can be connectual instead of sexual. How about that?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
All right. So talk to me about kind of like what do you see as, your definition of intimacy versus kind of like, we'll come back to sex, but like, let's just talk about intimacy first.
Okay. So to me, intimacy, it's more of a, just a present connection. It doesn't have to be like touch. It could be prayer. It could be, really just focused on, each other. It could be soul gazing. It could be, which is looking into each other's eyes and just connecting on that level. It could be intimacy to me could be, reading a book together. It could be exploring, talking about like our first date or, things that make me happy. It's just it's a connection. I believe it's more of a spiritual, mental connection as opposed to a physical connection.
Yeah. So let's talk about like your idea of intimacy is a little bit different than mine, but let's say that your idea of intimacy is more through communication and talking about, maybe like, hey, our first date or just talking about life. That really makes you feel like we're connected, you're intimate, and then also prayer. So a lot of, your connection comes from a communication standpoint as far as intimacy, where maybe mine may be more of a physical, thing. And when you say, soul gazing, what exactly does that mean to someone who doesn't have any idea what that is?
So for us, I mean, it's sitting down and just, looking into each other's eyes for a period of time, just like connecting in a deeper, I think you start out and you tend to want to smile or whatnot, but I don't know, how many people have experienced it, or when we, truly do it. And it's hard to explain when you're not doing it, but it's a below surface connection of just looking into each other's eyes. And I think it's called soul gazing because it takes you to a deeper level. It's connecting with a soul as opposed to, like just
connecting with the outer,
right,
person. Or so
well, and also I was going to say, like, I truly believe I'm like more of a communication intimate connector because I communicate more. Right.
So you're a verbal communicator, where I may be more of a physical communicator or like touching communicator, but we have to kind of figure out, like, hey, which one does each person like, and like, how do we do that? So like soul gazing is a way that we can connect, or a way that a couple can connect, and I think the big thing is, as couples, we get used to looking at each other, but we don't actually see each other. And so soul gazing is an opportunity for you to actually see each other beyond, the physical, beyond the outer layer, and actually see each other at a whole different level.
Yeah, very true. And I just think, that's not a, an intimate way to communicate. That's not communication intimately. So you are quiet, you're not talking. And I just think, I just really think when we were able to do it, and then we did it with our couples, the connection that comes out of it is, you almost don't believe it until you walk through it. Yeah. And you don't realize you can connect in a way, or you can reconnect. I think a lot of our couples, it was like this deeper reconnection before like the physical part of it. And I truly believe a lot of times, depending, that the intimate part leads to, more of, the sexual part, but to have that prior to is just, it just deepens it. It makes it more, I don't know, I want to say emotional in a way.
Yeah. It just has a connection feeling beyond just the surface level. And I think where you're talking about is a lot of the couples we've done this with, I think all of them kind of came back and said, listen, like, this felt like better than sex in a way of like connection, and I think what's cool about it is, I think a lot of times what we want intimacy, but we settle for sex. And we want this connection, but we kind of settle for this other thing because we don't really know what intimacy is. And so,
I think it's easier too.
Connection or intimacy?
No.
Sex.
Yeah.
Sex is easier because it's like, hey, just like, let's take some action and let's like get it done.
And intimacy takes a little bit more work, and what works for one couple might not work for another, and so you really have to really explore.
Yeah. So, part of this is like, how does a couple, let's say they're really disconnected. How do they get back to, because here's the thing is, you see a couple disconnected, it's probably like they're either having sex or they're disconnected. And that's the way they're trying to figure out how to connect. But really, truly what sits in between that is intimacy. And that's where they're really missing out. How does a couple bring back intimacy into their marriage that's, been missing it for a while?
Well, I think for one, they talk about it, if it's something that they want. They have to realize that they want it. That it's missing. And then they, you can have a conversation. You can talk about, this is something that I'm missing that I want. It could be ways of creating that, and maybe questions, like they can ask each other.
Yeah. Do you have any of those questions that you might be able to ask?
So I'm saying if they want to create the intimacy, like they can start with questions that can help ignite that.
Yeah. So some of the questions like I remember going through with you was like, hey, you know, do you remember our first date? What did we do? Do you remember like our first kiss? And those brought back a lot of memories that we had when we connected. And it was kind of cool to kind of go down that lane and really look at, hey, this is how we originally connected, and kind of bringing that back into today. And I think sometimes as couples, we forget about, you know, where we first met. We forget about like our first kiss, maybe the first time we had sex. And when you start talking about that stuff, your guard kind of goes down and you begin to kind of open up and say, hey, you know what? I do remember that. I really enjoyed it. And it kind of changes how you show up in the conversation.
Right. And how can we recreate that today? You know, I mean, everything comes, you have kids, you have work, you have, you know, so I think a lot of times at night, it's like the act of is easier than going through. So, I mean, I feel like date night is even just an intimate way to connect, or, you know, playing a game together, you know, at night, you know, something that you're alone that you can connect that doesn't require.
So one of the things that I, you know, kind of hear you say is like, well, listen, like a lot of it is just, you know, having open conversation. But one of the things that I really want to point out is like, I remember hearing a definition of intimacy as into me, you see.
Yeah.
And what that really meant was, you know, we look at the surface level of our relationship all the time. We look at the mirror, you know, we look at our spouse, but are we really seeing our spouse at the level that they want to be seen? And I truly believe that intimacy is in to me, you see. And so I see you at a whole different level than just, you know, you standing in front of me. I see your soul. I see your heart. I see who you are. You know, I see your light. And that truly connects us, because that's who I believe that I fell in love with and continue, you know, to be in love with today. And so I think at a certain level, we have to see into our spouse or see into me beyond, you know, kind of the shell or the outer layer for us to get into intimacy.
Right. And I think as you're speaking that, I mean, speaking those things out. So saying those things, you know, I mean, if you, you know, I mean, think your spouse, you know, I mean, speak those words to them. You look hot, you know, I see you as a light. Like, I feel like those can be intimate, you know, ways of connection too.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, what we do sometimes on those is like inside of, you know, leaving each other messages. It's like reminding each other of like, hey, I do actually see you. I do actually see what you're doing. I do see what you're doing with our kids. I do see what you're doing with other, you know, women. And I see you leading, and I see your light that you're shining on other people. And I think that's really powerful. And I want you to know that, you know, I see that in you. And when you say that, it lights, you know, it lights you up. It lights me up.
Right. And I think even outside of a message, like I'm saying, like, you know, in an intimate, like you speaking it, like a husband speaking to a wife that way, or a wife speaking to a husband that way. I think that connects, you know, them into, you know, and I even go back to like dating or whatnot. A lot of times those are the things that you remember. Oh my gosh, like he said this, or, you know what I mean? And even like the planning of certain things, or the intimate details, you know, that we kind of tend to, they kind of
take for granted.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I would say as we continue to be married, as we continue to be together, the intimate details that maybe we once, you know, thought were, you know, important or maybe overlooked or taken for granted are now things that each of us really want, you know, on a different level. It's like, hey, you want me to date you. You want me to kind of surprise you sometimes. You want me to take you places where maybe you haven't been. You want me to be in a place to where it's like not calculated. Like, hey, we've done this every week for the last, like, you know, 10 years. It's like, where's the surprise? Where's the, you know,
Right. So to me, I mean, that's exactly, to me, intimacy is more of that connection. It's more of like the investment into the relationship outside of,
The
you know,
normal
the sexual connection.
Right. So I guess, where I get, kind of confused, or maybe a guy or a relationship might get confused, is like, how do we even start out, being intimate? And I know you said talking, but like, is there a specific way that someone could say, like, listen, like, if I start doing this, one of them was like leaving messages and like actually catching each other and saying, hey, I see what you're doing. And I don't just see it, but like, I see what you're doing for our kids, for, other people, but like also just taking that a step further and saying, okay, look, I want to really tap into this intimacy and take it to the next level. Like, opening up conversation about, where we're going, what's our vision for the future.
Right. I also think, we talk a lot about love languages, and those can play an important role into being intimate with your spouse as well.
Okay. So kind of like,
so maybe it's words of affirmation, and so speaking those things as opposed to writing them, speaking those into them. Yeah. And then another one, quality time, that quality time one-on-one, that you're making that commitment to spend that time together, to create that date night, to make it intimate. Maybe it's candles, maybe it's going a little bit extra. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I can even think of, talking to you before we were going to go out on date night, and you're like, hey, if I got to bring all this stuff to the office, doesn't really feel like a date night to me. And I was like, okay, like maybe I need to up my game right now.
Well, and let's let them know Jesse wanted me to bring his change of clothes. And then I'm like, well, I mean, it's not like we get to go out. So should I, like, what about, like, do you want to have a drink? Do you want a margarita? And he's like, oh yeah, could you bring that too? And I was like, no. I was like, how about you come home and get dressed and then we go together, so it feels more like a date.
Yeah. And being okay with saying that, and saying what you want on an intimate level. So even if you feel like your spouse is like, hey, I don't think they get what intimacy is, like, you have to also be willing to communicate what that is to you.
Yes.
Because what that is to you may be different than what it is to your spouse.
Well, and it's funny that you even bring that up, because I didn't even look at it like that. I mean, we're so like, I guess I just am very open now with like what I want and how I feel, that it was kind of like, but that could definitely lead to, I mean, a way that I felt, that was like, wow, this really doesn't feel like a date night if this is, all the work that has to go into it. So I really do think that everyone has a different level of intimacy, or what that looks like to them. So even asking your spouse, what does intimacy look like to you? Maybe even saying like, do you think I'm very, do I do things to you that, are intimate? And, if not, how can I step that up?
Right. And, that's where we're going to get, towards the end of this, we're going to ask people where they can go. But what is sex, to you? How's that different than intimacy?
I'm so visual. So to me, the intimate part is, could be like the back rub, or the words of affirmation, or, I feel intimately connected with, when we're praying for each other. Those are different ways I feel, to me, I'm connected to you intimately. And then sex is, more of the act of, but it's also a way of connection, to me as well. So yeah, intimacy is really the connection, but then there's the sexual connection as well. Intimacy doesn't have to be physical, but sex does.
Right.
So I think that's where I would say they're different.
Okay.
And for me.
Okay, so sex is more of the physical act of doing something.
Yes and no, because it's connection, but it has to be physical. To me, it has to be physical. You can't do it if you're not, you know what I mean? It can't not be physical.
Mental sex.
Right.
Or emotional
no,
sex.
or spirit. I mean, so.
It can be spiritual.
But so, yes, that's where
Yeah, so like sex is like the act of doing, in intimacy, maybe the act of feeling or being in a certain state. But I think a lot of times, like, one of the things that we hear a lot is either couples are disconnected, they're not having sex at all, or, there's couples that are having sex all the time, and it may be the only way that they're connecting. And I think there's two ends of the spectrum. It's like, just because you're having sex doesn't mean you're intimate. And even if you're not having sex, you're probably not intimate either. And so I think there's a line in between both of those to where it's like, hey, finding kind of that happy medium between both. You're having sex, consistently, but you're also connecting on an intimate level. And
well, I was going to say, even having sex doesn't mean you're connected,
right?
Or being intimate doesn't mean you're connected. So I really think it comes down to the couple. I really do. I really think it comes down to the couple, and then it comes down to the individual and what they want and desire in that relationship.
Right.
So I think we could say, this is what I think, this is what you think, this is what's for our marriage. But I truly believe, their communication around it and opening up to the conversation of, where do you think we are? And it could be different, it could be 10 years ago, could be different than today.
Yeah, but I also think that there's a systematic approach to sex and intimacy that can lead to a certain level of connection.
Yes.
And I also believe that, hey, if you're having sex 5, 6, 7 times a week, that you're truly not connecting on an intimate level. You're only connecting on a sexual level. And so I think that,
well, it depends on.
Yeah. I don't know if I see that, because I see couples that could have sex all the time sexually and not be committed intimately. But there's couples that, don't ever have sex that aren't committed or aren't connected intimately either. And so I think there's kind of a place in between both of those that's like kind of a happy medium. It's like, having sex 2 to 3 times a week, or maybe, intimacy 2 to 3 times a week is you're connecting on both levels. You're not like really focusing on one or the other.
But yeah, and I think there's maybe different ways to create that connection.
Sure.
So
there's always like different ways to connect it or to create the connection for other people and other couples. But what I've seen and what I've, witnessed inside of coaching is, when couples are having, sex, 5, 6, 7 times a week, they're making up for something else they're missing in their relationship.
Right.
And it may be the only way that they connect,
at all.
Period, at all. And so I'm saying is like, hey, that's as much of an issue as somebody who may not be connecting and having sex at all.
Definitely. And I think that that's a deeper, that 100%. But I guess when I think of that, I guess my heart, thinks about that couple. But I also think about that may be, again, their way of connection. So that's all they know.
Right.
So
yeah, if it's all it's the only way you usually go.
Right.
And, we only know what we've been taught. But I also want to give both sides of the spectrum. It's like, hey, if you're not having sex and you're not having intimacy, there's a major problem in your relationship. You can't just sit back and say, hey, we're just best friends.
Right.
Because, you're not. Like, yeah, you're maybe best friends in your marriage, but
that's not what you want.
Sex and intimacy is a huge part of that.
Right.
And then also on the extreme other side is, hey, if you're just having sex
to have sex
and you're not connecting, there's a huge problem inside of that. And so both sides kind of have to come back to the middle and say, okay, what really works for us?
Mm-hmm.
as a couple. And yes, that's different for everybody. Some people, it may be, having sex once a week, twice a week, or every other week, and just being able to connect on an intimate level, do things like soul gazing, practice those things to where we can intimately connect. But I think a lot of guys want intimacy and they settle for sex because they don't know what intimacy actually is.
Or maybe they don't feel comfortable and they haven't had the conversation, and so, yeah, definitely. And
I remember, taking some of the couples we coach through, soul gazing, and how, both sides, the man and the woman, were both kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Think about it. Just looking at your spouse for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and you haven't actually like looked at them. And, if you remember, people were crossing their arms, closing their eyes, laughing.
There was crying. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And so as that, wall kind of came down, you started to see, them open up on a physical, mental, and spiritual level.
Well, and I think they saw their spouse on a whole different level.
Yeah. And so what we're saying is like, listen, there's a whole nother level of you seeing your spouse beyond sex, even beyond intimacy, that really can get you connected to them. But you're going to have to like slow down, and you're going to have to, stop and really see each other and look each other in the eye to be able to see that. So, as we're going through this, one of the things that Katie, likes to do is she likes to say, well, listen, where are you at?
I'm just such a firm believer in realizing where you're at right now. Because if I don't know where I'm at, or if I don't know where you're at, then how do I even move forward?
Right. So the important thing is to say, okay, well, where are we at today?
Yeah.
Or where am I at today?
Right.
In sex and intimacy. And I'm going to score myself. So maybe, I score myself a 4,
mm-hmm.
And I score you, say a 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we know where we are today. And once we're aware of where we are today, we can begin to change that.
Well, and once, you score yourself, I score myself, and then we open up communication.
Right.
Because a 3 to me, you giving me a 3 and me giving myself a 5, then we talk about like, okay, well, what does that look like to you? Well, because maybe we've never even talked about this. And I can remember, I don't even know when, like years ago, when we really opened up communication around this area, my needs were different than yours,
right.
And so it's huge. I truly believe it's huge to, what's working, what's not working, and then somewhere in the middle, and then to be able to sit down and talk about it.
Yeah. So there's, hey, here's where we're at today. Here's where I think I am. Here's where I think you are. And then, here's why I gave you that score. Here's why I gave you that number. And being honest about that, because if you're not honest about where each other's at or where you believe, how do you move forward?
Well, right. And how do you, if you don't know what the other person wants, how do you give them what they want?
Right. And so if we aren't aware of where we are, then we can't move forward and we can't change where we're at. So those are the first 2 things. Is number 1, get clear on, hey, here's my score, 1 to 10. 10 would be, hey, I don't have to change anything. 1 might mean, hey, there's a lot of work we got to do here. 5 is, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. But just give yourself a score on where you think you're at. Give your spouse a score on where you think they're at. And then tell them why you scored yourself and them that way. And the last part is how do I improve? So say that I'm a 4. What would make me a 5, or what would make Katie a 4, or what would make Katie a 5?
Right. And going one number above, like we don't need to go from a 4 to a 10, let's not get crazy. And, when I think about some of this too, it comes to mind that like, there may be other things, that pain points in someone's life, you know what I mean? That holds them back from, maybe someone's a 4 and their spouse is talking to them about how to get there, but there may be some underlying pain for a spouse. And so I think that's also a very big thing to think about, and to, to be able to talk openly with your spouse about those things and not feel guilt and not feel shame, as, like, hey, I remember after having our third child, I went through like, I don't know. I feel like my drive has lessened or, and I literally did feel guilty and I felt alone and I felt like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. Like what happened after this, third child that made me, cause this is not what I remember. And being able to walk through that. But in the beginning, it's a very hard place to go.
So maybe the greatest, pain or greatest problem is not being able to be honest with your spouse about where you're at and why you feel the way you do. Because, if I look at like back at our relationship, it was really hard for you to say, hey, I just don't have the drive. It's not you, it's me. But no matter how much someone says that, you still feel it as it's your fault as the other person.
Well, I had to own it myself and I had to be okay with like, that it doesn't mean there's something wrong with me and I'm going to do whatever it takes to figure this out. And then it was literally talking to my doctor, her saying, oh my gosh, like hormones and this and all this plays a role. So I just wanted to, that was really on my heart to say, because there's a lot of things, we've coached couples where, sex could be amazing for a long time. And then all of a sudden, like their past pain of being abused or whatnot comes up and that plays a role. So there's a lot of other things just besides, let me rate you and see where you're at. So I think being able to open up and talk about those things as well,
right,
really take your intimacy and your relationship to another level.
Yeah. So maybe, some of the key points that kind of come up in this is, maybe I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. Maybe, I don't have an orgasm. And so those are things that come up inside of that to where it's like, it's okay to admit that, because when you admit it, chances are that you're going to become aware and you're going to make some changes that are going to get you to a place where you can like it. So I can even remember, hey, I don't like this, but I do like this. And being able to be honest about, hey, I like this, put your hand here, or I don't like this, don't put your hand there. And just being very specific about what you do and don't like. I think that's super important.
Right. And I think sometimes we feel shame and guilt even around that.
Yeah.
But, it's with your husband or your wife, having that open conversation. There is nothing to feel guilty about. And, I truly believe you even can bring prayer into that and ask for, oh my gosh, I want to release this and I want to be able to speak to my husband about this. This is a really hard place for me. So that's the other thing I think you really have to work through personally, is being able to be open and to be honest and say those things and not feel any guilt and shame, because there really isn't a reason to.
Yeah. And a part of that is saying like, hey, do I have a safe place to communicate about my wants and needs in sex on both sides, what I like, what I don't like, without feeling like, I might get attacked, or without feeling like he doesn't understand or she doesn't understand. The more open we can be, the more truth we can say, the more we can move on and get to what each other needs.
Well, and speaking to both spouses, whether you're the husband or you're the wife in a situation like that, being comforting and understanding, and not pushing and not pursuing, giving your spouse, whether it be the husband or the wife, that safe place to share is absolutely huge. And if you don't have that, that's probably, something else that needs to be addressed.
Right. And, I think part of it is like, we all want to feel safe. We all want to feel like we can open up, whether you're male, female. We all want to feel like we can be honest without being judged. And I think that's really an important thing. And I think defining a safe place to say, listen, if we're going to go into this conversation about sex and intimacy, we have to be able to both openly share and be honest about what we want, where we are, and where we're going, so that we can move out of the current place that we're in.
Definitely. And it's just, if that scoring even seems a little bit harsh, it's just, I would just say open up communication about it. Jess and I are always here to, send a message or whatnot. If you want some guidance, if you need, I went to a doctor and talked to a doctor a little bit of what I was dealing with. And so, we're really here, like, obviously to encourage you and to remind you that, like, the communication around it and both sex and intimacy in marriage are so important. But it's really, it really comes down to communicating and being able to be open with each other.
Yeah. And I think about, the more you can communicate your needs, your desires, where you're at, where you want to go, the easier it is to move out of the place that you're in today.
Right. And it's just one step forward, honestly. I mean, we've taken steps backwards and then we take steps forward. But 100%.
Yeah. So if you guys are looking to connect further with a group of like-minded couples, join our Power Couples Facebook group, where we will be talking specifically about these topics of communication, sex, intimacy, parenting, spirituality, co-creating. But this is really a place for you to get plugged in with me and Katie and go further in depth on what we have going on. Plus, this is an opportunity for you to work on your marriage and receive coaching and tips, hacks, habits that are going to get you guys out of where you currently are into where you want to be. So if you want to reach out to us, you can reach out to us, Katie at habitbasedlifestyle.com. You can reach out to me, Jesse, at habitbasedlifestyle.com. You can email us, ask us questions, and we'll be there to help you out. Until next podcast, have a great day.
This is the Power Couple Podcast. This is where you go. This is where you go when you're ready to expand in your marriage inside of communication, sex and intimacy, parenting, spirituality, and co-creation. If you're ready to take your marriage to the next level, then welcome